I love a good duck stew because it's full flavoured and it's really rich. And I'm going to serve my duck stew with a really creamy risotto. Now, when you're starting a stew, you always need to seal off the meat. So I've got 4 duck legs here, and I've just started on a really low heat and brought the temperature up. The reason I do this is because we want to render as much fat off the duck as possible. See how there's a lot of duck fat down the bottom there? That's what we're aiming for. Now that they're sealed, and this took about 5 minutes, I'll remove the duck legs, and I'm using a pressure cooker to cook my stew. This one's really wide, so I can fit the 4 duck legs in it. Now, I'll just remove some of the duck fat, and we'll save that for some delicious roast potatoes at a later date. So don't throw that out, just let it cool, pop it in a container into the fridge. Now, while this is still hot, we'll add half of these onions because the rest of the onions I'm going to use for the risotto later. And I just want to cook them so they soften and start to caramelize. I'll also add 2 sticks of celery that I've finely chopped. You can add some carrot to this too, that'll impart a sweet flavour, but I'm going to keep it just to the celery and onion today. And then again, give that a stir and allow that to sweat off. I'll also season this with a generous amount of salt. Okay, while that's cooking off, 3 cloves of garlic. I'll just crush the garlic and then roughly chop it just with the back of a knife. And then we'll run the knife through it 3 or 4 times. Just a rough chop, because after the cook, it'll become really, really soft and sweet. And now for some hard herbs, you could use some thyme or some bay leaves are fantastic. Even rosemary works really nicely with duck. But sage works perfectly too. So if you can get your hands on sage, use it, but use it sparingly because it's quite strong. So I'll just take off 3 or 4 leaves and I'll roughly chop it thinly. And now that can go in with our veggies. Now that's softened up nicely, so let's add some tomato paste. When you're cooking with tomato paste, you do need to toast it off because if you don't, you'll get a really bitter, acidic flavour. So we'll add that, a generous tablespoon, and we'll give that a stir. Now I need to deglaze this, so 300 millilitres of white wine. I like to use a Chardonnay when I'm cooking, so we'll add that. And then the rest of this, 200 millilitres, we'll reserve for our risotto. So we'll put that over here. Now with wine, we're just going to let that bubble away and just reduce before we add our duck. Now the reason I love pressure cooking so much is it cooks the meat in less than half the time. So if a stew takes 2 hours, this is going to take 45 minutes and you'll get that beautiful slow cooked finish. Now that that's reduced, we'll add our duck and I'll put it skin side down, and you don't want them to overlap, so just in one single layer. And you want to use duck legs for this because it's going to shred away from the bone really easily and it won't dry out throughout the cooking process. Now for some mushrooms. Now I'm using some porcini mushrooms. I've always got some dried porcini on standby in my cupboard. Just squeeze out the excess water. Now because they're such a hearty mushroom, they can handle the heat, so they will hold their shape and they're going to give this such a wonderful flavour. So just run your knife through it once, so we've still got some texture, and we'll add this to the pressure cooker. Now this is like an instant stock, a mushroom stock, so you really don't need to add too much extra stock to this recipe. So we'll add this now and we'll pour it over, and I want to use about half of this. And then to make this into a rich ragu, I'll add some crushed tomatoes. So I'll just add roughly 1/4 cup. You need to season this throughout the cooking process. So we've seasoned the onions, I've seasoned the duck, and now I need to season the sauce. So another small pinch of salt. Now this is a pressure cooker and a stew pot, so you can choose if you want to slow cook it or do what I'm doing, which is pressure cooking. So we'll just close it and we'll set it to the pressure cooker function and then allow that to cook for about 45 minutes. That's all it takes for that meat to fall off the bone, which gives me just enough time to make a delicious risotto. Now I'm going to keep the risotto really simple, so onions and a little butter to start with in a pan. We want to cook these very gently so we don't get too much colour on them. So a small amount of olive oil, along with a knob of butter, And you want to add the butter with the olive oil so that butter doesn't burn. Coat the base of the pan and then add the onions. We're going to cook that off for 3 to 4 minutes on a medium heat so they don't get caramelized, and then I'll add the risotto. Now this is carnaroli rice, this is perfect risotto rice. So once those onions are softened, I'm going to add the rice and coat it in the onions, then I'll deglaze with the rest of our white wine. Okay, I've added the wine and you can see that it's completely absorbed by the rice, and now it's time to start adding the stock. So this is 1 litre of chicken stock and I've just brought it up to the boil. You want your stock to be hot when you add it to the rice. So this is where you become quite patient with the risotto. At the beginning, add 1 ladleful to the rice and then we'll slowly mix it and agitate the pan. By agitating the pan, we're going to release some of the starch from the rice, and this is what's going to make it really silky smooth. Once that's absorbed, I'll add some more stock, and I'll also use the leftover porcini stock because that's going to give this a great flavour too. Now the risotto is almost cooked and I've turned the pressure cooker off. I've released the steam and now it's safe to open the lid. Oh, and that smell. I wish you could smell this. It smells amazing. I can smell the sage and I can smell the porcini mushrooms. And this is what it's all about. This glorious duck that is cooked to perfection. 45 minutes in the pressure cooker, and see how that just falls away from the bone. All right, I'm going to keep shredding this and this risotto will be done just on time. Right, I've returned the shredded duck into the sauce and look at this risotto. See how creamy it is? Just have a taste of the grains of rice. They should be just slightly chalky in the centre. Now I'll finish this off with a knob of butter. And then once that starts to melt into the risotto, turn the heat off because then I'm going to add a handful of Parmesan cheese. You don't want this to be boiling when you add the Parmesan cheese because it'll clump together as opposed to achieving that glossy look. So in with the Parmesan and let's plate this up. Spoon the risotto onto the plate. And then just with the back of a spoon, I like to spread it out. A very similar concept to osso buco, where you would serve it with a saffron risotto and then add a gremolata on top. You know what? This doesn't need a gremolata. This is perfect, as is duck ragu with a risotto. This is heaven on a plate. I can't resist. I'm gonna have a taste. Bit of the risotto, some of the duck. That's my kind of food. The only thing that's missing is a Pinot Noir. That goes perfectly with slow cooked duck.